What's up everybody and welcome back to my channel. I'm outdoors today because it finally stopped raining in California and I was able to drive over to the park by my house to make today's video. Today we're talking about the actual cost of medium format photography. I've got a couple of cameras with me. I have this Rolleiflex 3.5 planar. This is probably my go-to medium format camera because it travels super easy. It's small, compact, it's really sharp, beautiful. The serial number of this camera dates to 1956, and it is just a flawless camera. I love shooting with it. I've got one more. This belonged to my uncle. He died in 1992, and you can watch the video about how I got this camera last year after so many years of this camera being missing. You can watch that video in one of the links below or on the card here on this channel. I think I know how to do cards now, so that's a new thing. But this is a Mamiya RB67, and it is just a huge beast of a camera. And as we talk about the true cost of shooting medium format film, I'm using these two cameras as my data points because they are a little different and they have different values every time I click the shutter. So we're gonna look at 4 different types of film today. The first one we're gonna look at is Kodak Portra 400. And we're gonna talk about the cost of shooting Portra 400 on medium format. We're gonna talk about Kodak Gold 200. We're gonna talk about Ektar 100. And last, we're gonna talk about Ilford HP5 400. All right, I've got some notes here because this requires math, and I would consider myself more of an artist than a mathematician. When I buy a box of Portra 400, I get 5 rolls and the box costs me $65.95. And of course, that is before tax. Tax, I'm not gonna include in this conversation because that'll be different for you no matter where you are. So $65.95 for a 5-pack. That ends up being $13.19 a roll. Let's start there with $13.19 per roll. But a roll of film doesn't do you any good unless you develop that roll of film. I typically develop using Indie Film Lab, and a roll of 120 format costs $16 to develop with Indie Film Lab. So now we're looking at a total of $29.19 per roll to shoot and develop. Now, I mentioned before that I shoot on 2 different medium format cameras, and one thing that's different about medium format than 35 is that medium format could be a 6x6 or a 6x7. It depends on the camera that you're using. So this Rolleiflex, for example, shoots at a 6x6, which means that on a roll of 120, I will get 12 shots per roll on this camera. But on the Mamiya, this shoots a 6x7 and only gives me 10 photos per roll of 120 film. Now, of course, you can get different backs and go to like a 6.45, different experience, but we're talking today just primarily about shooting medium format 6.6, 6.7. Okay, let me put this away because man, that thing is heavy to hold. Okay, back to this Portra 400 conversation. So remember, we are at $29.19 per roll of Portra 400. So at 10 shots on the Rolleiflex, every time I press this button, costs me $2.43. Now, of course, that's all in. That's the film and getting it developed at Indie Film Lab. But there you go, $2.43. I wind a shot 2, I focus my shot, and guess what? Another $2.43. That is how much Portra cost me every time I press the shutter. It's $2.43. On the Mamiya RB67, this much bigger, bulkier camera that only gives me 10 photos, it comes out to $2.92 every time I press the shutter. So you think about when you shoot digital, how you can kind of run and gun. You can take hundreds or thousands of exposures in a session. If I take 10 photos, I've spent $30 basically. So I'm very calculated when I shoot medium format for that reason. Okay, let's talk about Gold 200, because this is primarily what I've been shooting lately because it is a much more affordable film. And when I say affordable, It's not by much, but it is a cheaper film, so let's talk about the numbers. This, for a box of 5, cost me $44.95, which translates to $8.99 a roll. Now let's compare that back to Portra. Portra was $13.19 per roll. This is $8.99 per roll in a box of 5. Of course, we have the same number to develop. It still costs $16 to develop this roll of film. So that brings me to a total of $24.99 to shoot a roll of Gold 200. On the Rolleiflex, when I do 12 exposures, that translates to $2.08 every time I click the shutter. And on the Mamiya RB67, that translates to $2.50 every time I press the shutter. And speaking of Kodak Gold, today's video is brought to you by Monk Manual. Back in the fall, I had the privilege of shooting the Life Atlas by Monk Manual, which is their latest initiative and project to bring you a more holistic lifestyle. One of the more exciting things I was able to do with this campaign was to shoot some of it on medium format film while I was in Wyoming. I mostly shot Gold 200, but I also shot some expired film, some Vericolor 3, and you can see just from these photos how gorgeous expired film can be if you expose it correctly, and that's an entirely different video. So check out Monk Manual, link below. Check out their planners, their Sprout Journal for children. Check out the Life Atlas, an entire program my family and I are participating in, and see what you think. Kodak Gold is a beautiful film, and I get great photos on it, and it's not too different than Portra. It's a little warmer, but honestly, if you put Portra and Kodak Gold side by side, you'll see some subtle differences in the grain and in the temperature, but it's still, Kodak Gold is a great film. Okay, now we're gonna talk about the true cost of Ektar 100. This is not a film I shoot too often. If I need high contrast and some really rich color, I will shoot Ektar 100. A box of Ektar 100 will cost $54.95, which translates to $10.99 a roll. And then we add that $16 to develop, and we're looking at a total of $26.99 per roll of Ektar 100 when we shoot it. Now on the Rolleiflex with our 12 shots, that translates to $2.25 every time we press the shutter. And on the Mamiya RB67, that translates to $2.70 every time we press the shutter. So we see that medium format has some fairly high cost to use, but the images, in my opinion, they're definitely worth it, but you have to be so calculated unless you've got really deep pockets. And then you can just run and gun with film all day long in 2023. Okay, let's talk about Ilford, because this is a black and white film, and Ilford is a ton of fun to shoot, and it has a huge range of forgiveness, both in the highlights and in the lowlights. I actually like to shoot Ilford a little underexposed and then push it whenever I get my film developed to make it a little more grainy, because this is a pretty clean black and white film unless you're underexposing and pushing it. Now, Ilford is on the cheaper side of film. This costs $39.95 for a box of 5, which translates to $7.99 per roll. And we are going to add that $16 again to get this roll developed, and that comes out to $23.99 per roll. And on the Rolleiflex with 12 shots, that's gonna cost me $1.99 every time I press the shutter. So you can see this is the most cost-effective medium format film that I'm talking about today. And on the Mamiya RB67, every time I press the shutter, it costs $2.40. Okay, so what do we do with this information? Glad you asked. I wanted this video to illuminate what people mean when they say shooting film is expensive. If you don't shoot medium format, you might be unaware at the added cost every time you press the shutter. 35mm film is also pretty expensive, but the limitation of only having 12 shots or 10 shots in medium format kind of makes the whole thing a new ballpark. And while there is cost associated with it, and we didn't even talk about the cost of medium format cameras, I still feel like the medium format is a very worthwhile investment if you are okay, A, spending the money on the camera, B, spending the money on the film, and C, and this is the most important thing in my opinion about shooting medium format, you slow down. One thing film forces you to do is to think a little more, compose a little slower, especially on older cameras that don't have meters or use a prism system to focus. You really can't half press for the autofocus and then full press and then move on like you can with a digital system. Film requires sacrifice of speed, convenience, efficiency, and cost. However, it is incredibly worth it. If you are a medium format photographer, I would love to hear your experiences and how cost effective you're finding your film to be. There's also a lot of independent companies that are making film. So if you've got a recommendation on a good medium format film that is really cost effective, drop it in a comment below. I hope this video has been helpful for you in determining the cost of shooting medium format. Check out my website, my Instagram, check out Monk Manual, and be sure to like this video if you found it helpful, and subscribe if you find topics around gear, photography, and philosophy, and shooting film, and shooting digital, shooting Leica, shooting Sony, vans like this one. If you find this stuff interesting, subscribe, because I've got more stuff coming every single week. See you next time.